Hello and good morning. I'm Vicki Nguyen.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, big boost. The FDA gives the okay for a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine, but the agency says it's not for everyone. Details on the decision, including who qualifies and when, as we await a critical vote by the CDC. Inside the crisis, NBC News given rare access to a massive migrant camp along the Texas border, housing thousands of Haitians as state troopers anticipate more on the way.
The biggest concern right now is that we still have gaps along the border. We have individuals that we don't know who they are, where they're coming from, but they're crossing into our country.
This as we learn of the immigrants. Many have been let into the U.S. We'll have an update from along the Rio Grande. Making their case, the federal racketeering trial of singer R. Kelly now nearing an end as closing arguments begin. The new developments from the court as prosecutors describe a life of threats and abuse for his alleged victims. And online support. TikTok rolling out mental health resources to users in need. We'll talk about the new features just launched and why critics say more needs to be done to address young people's mental health.
Yeah.
Such an important conversation,
right?
And we are happy to keep on having it here. Yeah.
Especially, the new study that came out about Facebook and Instagram really knowing that their app was causing all kinds of issues among teenage girls, especially. Mental health is a big deal, and you should reach these folks where they are, which is on these applications.
Absolutely. It's good information if you're a user of those apps or if you're a parent wondering what your teen's dealing with on their phone. So we'll get to that a little bit later this hour. We begin this morning, though, with the latest on those COVID booster shots here in the U.S.
Yeah, the FDA has given emergency use authorization for a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine. But right now, only certain people will be able to get that third shot. As you may have heard, you have to be older than 65 or at high risk of complications from COVID. That includes immunosuppressed people and those who work in areas with a high risk for exposure, like healthcare workers and teachers. Now, this decision by the FDA comes as the CDC enters its second day of meetings on a third dose. A CDC panel's recommendation is also needed before those booster shots can be administered.
There still is room for confusion as the FDA hasn't cleared everyone for a booster yet, and it's unclear when or if that will happen. This comes as thousands of Americans are still testing positive for the virus every day. Although it seems we may be past the peak of this wave. An average of 127,000 Americans are being infected daily.
We have a team ready to break down everything you need to know about this pandemic this morning, from booster shots to testing and the current situation at hospitals. We're going to begin this morning with Dr. Anand Swaminathan. He's an assistant professor of emergency medicine at St. Joseph's Hospital. Good morning, Dr. Swaminathan. Let's talk about the FDA authorizing Pfizer's booster shot. It's now available to those folks who are 65 and older and those considered high risk. What do you think about that decision, and how long after their second shot should people wait before they get that booster?
The decision that we're seeing here is more driven by science than the idea of boosters for everybody that's 6 months out. So I'm appreciative of that we've really taken that science into account. We still need a lot of clarification on those last two groups. Who are the people who are high risk for severe COVID? Who are the high-risk exposures? Certainly healthcare workers, but frontline workers, grocery stores, waiters and waitresses, and teachers probably need to be included in that group as well. So we're going to need to see some real clarification from the CDC on those areas. And it's still unclear from the evidence that we have of whether boosters are actually needed, even in those groups. We don't have great evidence. What we're going to have to do is actually track it going forward as we give these boosters and see what the real prolonged effect of those boosters are.
Yeah, Doctor, you mentioned teachers, and in the FDA's decision, they included teachers as being in a high-risk environment needed for a booster. Of course, they're with these kids who are not vaccinated. So if teachers get boosters, will that have any type of positive impact on COVID cases for kids, especially in those classrooms where kids are younger than the eligible age to get the shot yet?
The truth is that we don't know exactly how these boosters protect others around us, but we can infer that it will provide some increased protection. The main thing here is to protect those teachers and keep them safe as they are getting repeatedly exposed, or they are more likely to be repeatedly exposed. And of course, Savannah, we have to remember that vaccines are only one part of this. We need to be focused, especially in classrooms, on getting kids vaccinated, which is hopefully coming in the next month, making sure that we have good ventilation, that we are masking properly indoors. It's all of these different layers that we need.
Yeah, it's a multiple tool approach. Doctor, do you expect the COVID vaccine to be recommended annually like we do with the flu shot? And will we continue to need at least 2 doses each year, or is it still too early to tell?
I think it's still too early to tell. This third dose might be the third of a series, and that might be it, like we see with something like hepatitis B. Or it might be that we do have to get routine boosters or routine immunizations like we see with influenza. We simply just don't know at this point. And what we have to remember is that in spite of the fact that this booster is approved, the primary 2 vaccines for the vast majority of people provide extremely good protection against the things that we really worry about, which is hospitalization and severe disease. So it's unclear exactly if these boosters or how much these boosters are really going to help going forward.
I think it's such a good point to keep bringing up. There's so much that we don't know, especially in combating misinformation. It's not just that everything keeps changing. It's because the virus is changing and we don't know yet.
Yeah, and these countries need to share their data. Dr. Swaminathan, thank you so much for your time this morning. Let's turn now to NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber. She's in Des Moines, Iowa, with the very latest on the rise in cases there. Ellison, in Iowa, the state recently closed all of its mass testing sites, but clearly people still need COVID tests. So where do they go now?
Yeah, we're kind of in this place where big events are coming back. People are wanting to go to arena concerts, big shows. They're attending football games. They're traveling abroad. And in a lot of those cases, you kind of have 2 things or 2 choices, if you will. Either you show proof of vaccination or you need to have a negative COVID test within a certain time frame. What they're seeing happen here is people who are in that latter category where maybe they're not vaccinated and they need to get a COVID test to attend one of these events. They are showing up to get tested for COVID-19, even though they don't have any symptoms, and they're going to hospitals and urgent care facilities, and they are really crowding those spaces, and it's delaying the processing time for people who are actually sick and might need help, and it's also increasingly taxing healthcare workers who were overburdened to begin with. Listen to some of what we heard.
This is going to be our new normal. So I think a lot of states that have big venues, such as we have in Des Moines and Polk County, need to think about this, because this is not something that's just happening here. This is something that's happening all over the United States. What's the easiest solution for all of this? It's to get vaccinated. We know vaccines are safe. We know they're effective.
You know, when they closed those mass testing sites in a lot of places, a lot of states, the reason for that was because they were then transitioning to giving COVID vaccines at those areas. So rebooting those really isn't a very feasible option in a lot of cases in this state right now, because they just don't have extra resources. They are giving out testing kits just like this one at the Polk County Healthcare Department. This is the most populous county in Iowa, and where a lot of those big events are taking place. They say they just need more people to utilize them. These are at-home kits. They give it to you, you do it at home, and then you just mail it off. But again, they say the easiest thing is for people who want to be out and about attending those events to get vaccinated, not only for themselves, but for their community, and also to not have to keep getting these tests when they don't necessarily need it.
Wow, makes sense. Thanks, Ellison. We appreciate it.
Turning now to Tennessee, where doctors are being faced with a seemingly impossible decision. Who should receive monoclonal antibody treatment? New guidelines from the National Institute of Health and the Tennessee Department of Health recommend doctors prioritize unvaccinated patients for treatment due to their risk level. And as patients wait in long lines, doctors say supplies are running dangerously low, forcing them to turn away people who may desperately need treatment. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins us now from outside a medical clinic in Brentwood, Tennessee, with more on this. Antonia, good morning. So first, just give us a sense of how many people are using this treatment in Tennessee, how doctors are choosing who's going to get that antibody treatment, and kind of the backlash that it's receiving, given that it is those unvaccinated patients, as I mentioned.
Good morning, Savannah. Look, here, the demand is far outstripping the supply right now. At this clinic behind me right here, they're getting about 50 requests, new requests a day to get access to these infusions. But they only have about 50 doses left for this entire week. And when we've spoken to providers all around the area here in Nashville, that's consistently what we've heard, that they have waiting lines for people who want to get infusions. And look, you know, this is increasingly complicated with these new guidelines from the NIH, from the Department of Health here, because previously, providers weren't really considering vaccination status. They were just looking at who's the sickest coming through the doors, who may have health complications and really need these infusions to stay out of the hospital. And so this clinic here is saying, frankly, they're going to ignore that guidance, that they don't want to worry about vaccination as they decide who gets the very few doses they have left on hand, while hospitals down the road are saying, no, this makes sense. We have to prioritize the unvaccinated in a state like Tennessee, where so many people are still hesitant. And when you're unvaccinated, you are 11 times more likely to end up hospitalized here. So, it has certainly become a really tense challenge here, and it is a day-to-day thing as providers scramble to come up with what's going to be their game plan as supplies are diminishing. Savannah?
Antonio, you mentioned specifically some of the issues that particular state, that Tennessee, is facing. Tell us, has this become a political issue there? And are doctors recommending still the vaccine as the best way to protect against COVID, especially hearing that this treatment is going to people who haven't been vaccinated?
It's absolutely become political, and yes, the medical community here is still begging people to consider vaccination. Less than half of the population here is vaccinated in Tennessee, so they have a long, long way to go. And doctors worry that people will lean on these monoclonal antibody treatments and say, hey, as long as this is available, I don't actually really need to get vaccinated. But as they're seeing the supplies of this diminish, they're begging people, go get vaccinated. We can't guarantee that if you call us here at this clinic, we are going to have space for you. The administrator of this clinic behind me here told me that just the other day she was on the phone with a mom who's 32 years old, begging her to get her husband into the clinic, and she could hear the husband in the background struggling to breathe. But because of the lack of doses that she had and the guidelines that she had to follow, she just couldn't take this man, and that was heartbreaking for her. I want you to take a listen to a conversation that I had with a doctor down the road at Vanderbilt, Dr. Karen Block. She runs their infusion clinic there, and their team is deciding that they do have to go along with this guidance. So, you can just see here how much this is a patchwork. Take a listen to Dr. Block.
It's a tough issue, and I think there is certainly a tension between people who feel like they've done the right thing and those who haven't. The way that I would explain it is really taking the politics out of it and really basing it on the science. And we know from the science that the folks who are going to get the sickest and who would benefit the most and who would be less likely to be hospitalized are those who are at highest risk. And I certainly would never suggest that somebody not get the vaccine, which is a really critical preventive measure. What the antibody is for really is for folks who break through and for folks who have symptomatic COVID. And so I think the messaging really should be that the vaccine is the first line of defense here.
I asked Dr. Block, as you interact with these unvaccinated patients asking for these infusions, are you able to convert them into people interested in getting the vaccine? And she sort of hedged and said, it has just been so challenging because of the political situation here in Tennessee. But doctors are trying their best to talk to patients face to face and get them to see the vaccine as the first line of defense. Savannah?
And you can absolutely imagine that tension that she described between people who feel like they did the right thing and they're needing that treatment. Antonio, I know you also spoke to several physicians about the confusion over these antibody treatments in general and how it's affecting their work. What more can you tell us about that?
It's the confusion, and the complication here is a day-to-day challenge for them. I spoke to two physicians who run this clinic and other clinics around the Nashville area. And, they're really hurting because as politicians and the federal government figure out how these doses are going to be dispersed around the country, how much certain states, certain hospital systems are going to receive, when patients are upset and they're panicking, they're not calling their, local representatives. They're calling the doctors who work at locations like this one. So it's these emergency physicians, it's the nurses who work alongside them who are hearing people leave panicked voicemails, who are having people come by and beg them, ask why they're so far behind in the queue. And that just makes their work all the more painful after, of course, as we all know, a really difficult year for all of them on the front lines of this. Take a listen to my conversation with the two physicians who run this site here.
I think they're upset and frustrated that they can't provide the treatment that the patients need. That's, we're trying to do the best we can, and the providers are very involved in patients' care, and again, just kind of frustrated they're not able to do what they need to do for our patients.
it's definitely taking a toll on their morale at work, you know, knowing that there's therapies out there that can really help keep people from going to the hospital and really make people well faster, and that we can't get them and administer them. It's very frustrating for our staff, but more so for our patients. There's a lot of patients who are feeling very desperate.
They say that if they don't get more supply in just the next couple days, they may have to announce that they are no longer going to offer this treatment at all, which is just unbelievable. Savannah?
Yeah, Antonia Hilton, really powerful reporting. Thank you so much. Now, after 5 weeks of graphic and detailed testimony, closing arguments are underway in the case against R&B singer R. Kelly. The 54-year-old is facing multiple federal charges in New York. They include 1 count of racketeering with 14 underlying acts of sexual exploitation of children, kidnapping, and forced labor. He also faces 8 counts of violating the Mann Act, which is essentially a human trafficking law. R. Kelly denies all these accusations. 11 of his accusers took the stand during the trial, all claiming the singer sexually abused them and manipulated them for years. The prosecution took 3 hours to summarize their case yesterday and will continue those closing arguments today. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now from outside the courthouse in Brooklyn, New York, with more on the trial. Ron, good morning. So tell us just what we've seen so far in the prosecution's closing argument. What picture were they trying to paint of R. Kelly? What were some of the moments that stood out to you in that courtroom, especially since this case has been highly publicized and become sort of part of the conversation in pop culture? Tell us what's actually happening within the court.
Well, you have to remember, R. Kelly during the 1990s was one of the biggest names in R&B pop music. He has sold tens of millions of albums. He was a mega star. He's not now, but he was then. And the prosecutors allege that during that time, he was running also a criminal enterprise, is the word they used to describe it, which was not just about his music career, but was also about getting his own sexual gratification, about luring, recruiting, grooming young women for his own pleasure. Of course, women and young girls were flocking to his concerts and to his events. And that's the allegation, that it was not just abuse, but that there was this racketeering going on, this criminal enterprise, like a mob boss, where his drivers, his security teams, his managers were all focused at his sexual gratification. And the things he allegedly did to these women are just horrific and awful. I mean, listening to some of the testimony, it's extremely emotional. It's just very graphic. He was allegedly very abusive physically, mentally. And what stands out, I think, more than anything, is just how detailed the prosecution is, trying to go through every single thing that they allege that he did over a 30-year period, remember, because prosecutors have been going after R. Kelly for a long time. There have been these rumors, allegations of sexual misconduct floating around him for a long time, and now the prosecutors feel like they finally got him, and so they are taking their time and going through this meticulously for the jury.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why these closing arguments really they're continuing today. What do we expect to hear today in those arguments?
We think the prosecutors have a couple more hours of arguments, going through, again, each charge and each allegation by a number of women, person by person. Remember, the big charge is racketeering, and then there are like 14 crimes that add up to racketeering in some way or another. And they are bribery, extortion, physically beating. It's just a litany of things. And they're trying to go through each of them. After that, the defense will step up and do its summation, its closing arguments. And it's unclear what that's going to amount to. The defense has lasted for all of several days. There are 5 or 6 witnesses who were presented, mostly friends, associates of R. Kelly, who basically said what a great guy he was and that they never saw him doing anything untoward or any misconduct, but then they were forced to admit that they weren't with him all the time and they didn't see what he was doing, especially behind closed doors. So it'll be interesting to see what the defense does come up with. They seem to have a very difficult job ahead of them.
It will be certainly interesting to see, and something that we'll be keeping an eye on. Ron Allen, thank you so much.
The search continues this morning for Brian Laundrie after his fiancée Gabby Petito's body was found. The coroner has called it a homicide, and Laundrie remains a person of interest. He hasn't been seen in more than a week. Investigators have been scouring a Florida preserve, but they haven't uncovered any signs of the missing 23-year-old. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is live in Northport this morning as police prepare for another day of searching. And Vaughn, no signs of laundry. Where are police searching today? And do we know anything new this morning?
Yeah, good morning, Vicki. They are right back at that site, that preserve, nature preserve. Essentially, this is a 25,000-acre plot of land, about 40 square miles. It is about a 20-minute drive from here, Brian Landry's home, where his parents, to the best of our knowledge, are still residing here at this time. There are questions about to what extent are the parents cooperating with authorities? To what extent are they aware of what Brian may have done? Or to what extent was he involved in Gabby Petito's passing? And do they know where Brian Landry is now? Those are the outstanding questions. And really, this search effort is far-reaching here. The only reason, to our understanding, that those authorities are at that particular reserve right now is because the parents say that 9 days ago, he left this home after returning from Wyoming. He left this home last Tuesday to go on a hike with his car. But this is where the timeline gets a little odd. It was Tuesday. Then the following day, Wednesday, the family says that he didn't return home. So they went over to that reserve, found his car. The following day, they went and picked up his car, brought it back to their home. It wasn't until Friday, 4 days after he supposedly went on that hike, that they finally called authorities to say that Brian was missing. So that is where this investigation stands, where this search stands. They are continuing to look through that area, having ATVs, drones. They had a boat out at the scene. It's a very swampy area where very much this search continues. At the same time, we have not been told of any leads or any evidence to suggest that he is actually at that reserve, Vicki.
Two more things, Vaughn. Is the family speaking at all about Brian's disappearance? And also, the coroner, he called Gabby Petito's death a homicide earlier this week. Any indication when the final report will be released?
We know from that initial autopsy determination from the coroner's office that it was, in fact, a homicide, but we are still waiting for the full autopsy to be finished and released. In the hope from that autopsy, that final autopsy, which could come at any hour, any day here, is exactly what the manner of death was. What was the cause of that homicide? Now, when it comes to this family here, we know that 2 days ago is when the FBI came in a search and essentially raided the house, pulling out potential evidence. And of course, the expectation is that they are now combing through that potential evidence. But again, the family, to the best of our knowledge, is still inside of that house. And we do not know, because the Brian Landry family has not made any public statements in recent days, other than to say that they were mourning the passing of Gabby Petito. But they have not suggested anything else publicly as to where if they know where Brian went and whether it is, in fact, in this area.
Yeah,
Vicki?
difficult situation for two families. Vaughn, thank you so much this morning.
Let's now get a check on your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns, hello, good morning. Do you have another test for us?
Yeah.
No test. No, yesterday you guys got incomplete. So we got to, once you guys work on your skills a little bit.
Okay, we promise to do so.
So, this morning the big story has been the heavy rain in areas of Virginia, West Virginia. That has swept through the nation's capital. We've got poured on. We've already picked up almost 1 to 2 inches right in the Beltway around D.C. this morning, so it's not a fun morning commute. We still have a lot of rain also in areas of Michigan and northern Indiana. So that'll be the story today as this rain sweeps through the east. It has tropical connections. It's a very humid morning from Philadelphia to New York to Baltimore, and that's why we're going to have these downpours during the day today. There's a great reward after this storm is gone, so we just have to get through it first. And we do have the potential, at least, for some flash flooding. And because New York City and Philadelphia and Baltimore and D.C. are included, it's a lot of people. 35 million are in flash flood watches. We do not have any flash flood warnings right now, so that's nice. As we go throughout the afternoon, the heaviest rains are expected to be in eastern PA, northern Jersey, the Catskills, and then eventually later tonight into areas of western portions of New England. 1 to 3 inches of rain, and then this will be isolated up to 5. So we haven't had a lot of rain in this area over the last week or two, so I don't think it's going to be horrific flooding, but if you get 5 inches in a short period of time, that'll, of course, cause problems. Besides the Northeast, it's a really nice weather map from the Northwest to the central U.S. The South is nice, still a little hot in Phoenix at 102. And even tomorrow, once we get rid of the rain in New England, it is the start of a fantastic first fall weekend. And, of course, next hour, I'll have more details on that.
We love that tease. Thank you, Bill. See you in a bit.
Bye, Bill.
And coming up, new developments along the southern border where thousands of Haitians are hoping to get into the U.S. But now we're learning many of them have been let in. We'll have the latest, plus a rare look at the migrant camp thousands are calling home.
Also, President Biden hoping to ease tensions with America's oldest ally. The latest on the meeting planned with France's president amid a diplomatic crisis. That's next on Morning News Now. The camp that became a makeshift home for thousands of Haitian migrants is getting smaller. We've learned that some are now being released into the U.S.
Yeah, and now NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky is taking us inside the camp where men, women, and children are facing an uncertain future.
Yeah, Savannah, Vicky, good morning. Hard to believe now the group left beneath this border bridge here in Del Rio has now been there more than a week. There are still thousands of Haitian men, women, and children facing very uncertain futures, and tensions are rising as these deportations only go up.
On the Texas border, these are the faces of those who don't know what tomorrow holds. Our crew given rare access to the camp, more than 5,000 Haitian migrants still call home.
And this has been the closest we've been allowed to get to this camp. And as we look this direction, it is hard to believe some of these men, women, and children have now been beneath this very bridge for more than a week, trying to create whatever shelter they can to stay cool. Everyone's future here, incredibly uncertain.
Just 2 days ago, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas with this public warning to migrants.
If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned.
DHS officials telling NBC News thousands of migrants who were under that bridge have been released into the United States. Many given notices to appear at an immigration center within 60 days to get a court date for an asylum hearing. Just yesterday, Mayorkas was pressed for specifics on the surge.
How many people have been returned? How many people are being detained? How many people have been dispersed to all points around America?
Senator, I would be pleased to provide you with that data.
I want them now. Why don't you have that information now?
Senator, I do not have that data.
Why not?
Back on the border, law enforcement doubling down.
So this is where pretty much everyone came across.
Right.
The dam where thousands crossed, now empty, with Texas State Trooper cars lining the riverbanks. DPS tells us up to 600 Haitian migrants are now making their way towards Del Rio. But it's the other areas that have them worried.
The biggest concern right now is that we still have gaps along the border. We have individuals that we don't know who they are, where they're coming from, but they're crossing into our country.
And this morning, we have seen records that suggest where at least a few of these migrants may be going. The Biden administration is now seeking out a private contractor to run a detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, with some guards required to speak either Spanish or Haitian Creole. Savannah, Vicky, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Morgan, thank you so much.
President Biden says the U.S. could have been more open about a submarine deal that left the French furious. The admission came after a phone call between Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron. It was the first time the two have spoken since the dispute, which caused France to recall its ambassador to the U.S. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now from Washington. And Monica, France is America's oldest ally. What are the White House and Macron now saying about what happened and the recalled ambassador?
Well, President Biden certainly doing cleanup during this 30-minute phone call yesterday, Vicky. The White House says the tone of that discussion was friendly, that the two leaders spoke about what happened and committed to working more closely together in the future. So it seems they have sort of smoothed that over for now. And looking ahead to the coming weeks, the two will actually meet at the end of October in Europe. It's unclear whether that's going to be on the sidelines of some upcoming global forums or whether that's going to be a standalone meeting. And as for the recalled ambassador, he's going to be returning to Washington in the next week or so. So that diplomatic dust-up certainly tense in the last few days. But as of yesterday, they at least seem to have an agreement. And the White House is pleased about how things can go, given how really that disagreement was so problematic for our oldest and longest ally.
Yeah, glad to hear they smooth things over. Turning to Biden's domestic agenda now, the president held a series of meetings at the White House with congressional leaders, moderate Democrats and progressives. What actually came out of those talks?
Well, we don't know many of the specifics, and that's because all of these meetings were behind closed doors. But lawmakers who did participate said they were productive. The White House put out their own readout saying they were pleased with some of the progress that was made, but indicating perhaps most intensely that there are more meetings to come and there's a lot more work to be done before Monday when some of these critical votes may take place. The White House says the president will still be engaging with these Democratic lawmakers, the moderates and the progressives, to try to chart a path forward in the coming days, with a lot of that work continuing into the weekend. And yes, this does essentially hinge on the president's domestic agenda. He wants to get that bipartisan infrastructure bill through, but the budget reconciliation priorities and the so-called human infrastructure, a major priority for this White House as well.
Monica, it was a promising issue over the summer, but negotiations for a sweeping bipartisan police reform bill have now broken down. Democratic Senator Cory Booker called Republican Senator Tim Scott to say Democrats were done negotiating. So how's the White House responding, and does the president have his own plans on this issue?
And remember, originally the president wanted to see police reform legislation done by May, by the one-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd. That got pushed way later into the summer, and now those talks have fallen apart. So both the White House and the president and the vice president issued statements expressing their disappointment. They placed a lot of the blame on Senate Republicans and said they're going to be working with civil rights groups and victims' families to see what more can be done. Something I thought was telling in the president's statement is he indicated he's still exploring what executive action he may be able to take when it comes to police reform. But his desire, obviously, his first priority here would be getting it actually done and passed into law. But given all the complications we just talked about with infrastructure and some of the other items, that's going to be a very steep uphill climb, Vicki.
Monica Albach covering a lot of ground for us, as always. Thank you this morning. All right, let's take a look at what is making news around the world.
NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing. Hey, Janice, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah and Vicki. Evergrande, the big property developer here and the world's most indebted company right now, eased some investor concerns today by saying it had reached a deal with bondholders. The problem, it still needs to pay over $83 million in interest, which is leaving a lot of market watchers believing it's only a matter of time before China's government is going to have to intervene to help prop up the company. Analysts concerned that Evergrande's $300 billion debt load is going to be a drag on China's economy here, though experts say this is not a Lehman Brothers moment, and they expect most of the fallout to be contained within China. In COVID news, Portugal is looking to lift the last of its COVID restrictions now that it has 85% of its country fully vaccinated. It's the most vaccinated country on the planet right now. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, officials, they want to be able to forget having lockdowns. They're going to try and boost vaccinations, and to do so, they may be offering shots at fast food restaurants, so you can get some Pfizer with your fries. New Zealand has been fighting an outbreak of the Delta variant, and the country's prime minister says that it is unlikely the country will ever get back to zero COVID cases again. And finally, after being canceled last year because of the pandemic, Milan Fashion Week is now underway with physical shows featuring real models on real runways. There are some virtual shows too, but this return to actual shows is seen as a real reason to celebrate. There are COVID protocols that are in place, though. We remember that Milan was the epicenter for Italy's COVID crisis in 2020. But there's a little extra glitz in the air for all of the fashion aficionados and designers and models as Milan Fashion Week continues until September 27th.
Good to see. It almost looked like that was an outdoor venue, or at least it was a huge place where they're holding it.
Better for social distancing and such. All right, Janice, thank you so much. And coming up, TikTok talks mental health.
Yeah, really important. The platform is now rolling out new resources for users who are struggling. We'll have more on that and why some say it's still not enough. You're watching Morning News Now. All right, you remember seeing it, one of the most memed images of the year. That man right there. Well, it is now turning into a Halloween costume, with one online fashion store recreating the outfit that Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders wore at President Biden's inauguration. You remember that. It is selling for $85 on the site Dolls Kill, but the chair is not included. You'll have to provide your own chair. But this classic Sanders outfit at January's inauguration, it quickly turned into a viral moment for the senator, and it's now a very comfortable and warm choice. Maybe you should add the parka, too, and you got the whole glasses. I could see you rocking that, Savannah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That picture, oh, my goodness, how funny was that when that first was circulating?
Oh, it was the best. His posture, too. It was like the whole thing.
It was just
the whole look was working.
It was something. All right, Vicki, thank you so much. Now to a really important conversation I am so happy that we're having. Are social media giants taking enough action on mental health? Just last week, TikTok announced it was rolling out new features to protect its users, while a Wall Street Journal report accused Facebook of knowing that Instagram is toxic, particularly for teenage girls. With more on that, we're joined by Colin Rosenblatt, NBC News youth and internet culture reporter, and Dr. Soumya Dave, psychiatrist and author of What a Happy Family. Good morning to both of you. It's so good to have you with us. And again, I'm so happy to be having this important conversation. So, Colin, let me start with you, just so that we can kind of set the scene here. Walk us through these new features that TikTok is introducing. What are they?
So TikTok has had a host of resources in the past. However, they are now rolling out a full landing page of crisis helplines that will be accessible around the world. They are also introducing basically a search deviation. If you were to search a term such as suicide or anorexia, you'll go to a landing page that says, hey, do you want to talk to someone about this? Are you okay? You can still view the content, but it's going to prompt you first to talk to someone, like the suicide crisis line or an eating disorder association. And TikTok acknowledges it is a place for mental health conversation. The hashtag mental health has been viewed more than 16 billion times with a B. So they just want to continue these conversations in a healthy way.
Now, Dr. Duvay, what do we know about the effect social media is having on the mental health of young people? I mean, we got this stunning report. Not only was it stunning that it seems that Facebook was aware of how bad this issue is, but just, I mean, the effects that it's having, even suicide. I mean, how serious is this problem, and are we taking it seriously enough?
This is a very serious problem and something that we continue to learn more about. A recent study in JAMA Pediatrics showed that this year, the rates of depression and anxiety in teenagers was 2 times more than it was in the prior years. So we're seeing trends going in a direction that's also very concerning. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact of social media on our youth and on everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Colin, Facebook's gotten a lot of criticism recently for downplaying the effect its app has on mental health. That was even before this report came out. This criticism existed, and then this came out just last week. How have they responded to this? And do you expect the sorts of resources TikTok has added to become the norm? Could more apps place a focus on that?
So Instagram is essentially saying that it's looking into ways to direct its users away from content that they may be looking at for too long. Now, to be fair, TikTok's algorithm does this as well, just like Instagram's. The only difference is that TikTok will provide a banner at the bottom of these topics that basically will say, here are more resources. TikTok also will sort of stop you once in a while and say, hey, you've been on the app for a really long time. Do you want to take a break and step away? And so we see TikTok basically taking these steps to be very proactive as the social media community comes under fire. It's unclear if other social media apps will take the steps that TikTok has, but hopefully it will become the norm.
And Dr. Duvay, do you think TikTok's features will make a meaningful difference to teens? And when you hear about those other features like, hey, do you want to take a break? Is that going to make an impact, would you say, to parents who are worrying about whether to take their kids' phones away, that if these apps are doing things like this, it's a little bit safer at least?
I would say that every step in the right direction counts, and so I'm happy to hear that. At the same time, I think that it's so important for us to continue having conversations even offline. So parents to children and asking, hey, how is your screen time affecting you? What images are you taking in? And I do want to emphasize that although it's really great that TikTok is having these resources out there, those resources are for educational purposes only. So if somebody really is struggling, if a teenager, for example, is having concerns about body image, is having symptoms of depression or anxiety, trouble connecting with others on and offline, it's always a good idea to seek out a mental health provider because these things are not a substitute for that.
And Dr. DeVay, it feels like we're inundated with so much bad news about social media, especially for a parent, with a kid with a phone. They don't know what they're doing on their phone in their room, and you just hear all these things that are going on these apps. What would you say to those parents if what they really feel like doing is just throwing their child's cell phone away?
I think open communication and having frequent conversations are so important. So sitting down as a family and saying, what are you taking in today? How is it affecting you? And maybe even saying, well, here's how my screen time is affecting me, and modeling that behavior. I've heard of families actually going on social media fasts together. And I love that, taking that time to say, we're going to send the phones away into a room. We're going to do these activities offline and see how we connect with experiences that have nothing to do with the screen.
Absolutely. Setting an example, so important. Dr. DeVay and Callan, thank you both so much for joining us on this topic.
That was excellent advice as a parent
absolutely.
myself, keeping the kids away from phones and social media as long as possible. Coming up, a teenage boy's death shedding light on the dangers of high school football.
Yeah, more on the growing debate over whether the sport should continue and what researchers say should be done to keep young athletes safe. You're watching Morning News Now. We're back with the growing debate about the safety of high school football.
Yeah, NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson brings us an important story this morning of a 14-year-old boy who died over the weekend after he sustained a head injury on the field. He is the 9th child to lose his life from football-related injuries this year.
Teenage deaths fueling more debate over the safety of kids playing football. Tyler Chrisman kicked off his freshman year with hopes of scoring touchdowns on the football field. But that field now holds a far more tragic memory. His dad writing on Facebook Tuesday, "We always knew you were meant to stand out. This is not the way we envisioned it, but this is what we have been dealt." Chrisman died this week. He suffered a head injury Saturday while playing in a high school game in northern New York. He was only 14 years old. His father, Jason Chrisman, sharing this heart-wrenching message. "We all prayed for a miracle to happen, for you to be saved. Sadly, the damage was just too much." This is the same kind of miracle Steve Ham prayed for in 2015 when his son Ben was sidelined after a tackle.
I said, "Ben, you know who I am?" And then he just, I'll never forget, it's a god-awful groan. It's and somebody recognized he was having seizures.
Paramedics rushed the high school junior to the hospital. Little over a week later, he was gone.
We made the family decision to unplug the machine, and he didn't last 5 minutes.
On average, over the past 3 years, there have been around 8 high school football deaths per academic year, according to the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research. Already this year, there have been 6, and it's only September.
What is the actual issue here that needs to be addressed?
Our first goal, of course, is to prevent them from happening in the first place. But when they do happen, the goal is then to act and work to mitigate any severe consequences.
Experts say schools should have an emergency action plan in writing and rehearse it. Follow state guidelines to determine when a player returns to the field after a concussion. Keep a defibrillator and a certified athletic trainer nearby, and report every incident that occurs.
The Chrisman family is going through now what you went through. What is your message to those parents?
I will be praying for you. I will pray for strength. It's been 6 years, and I'm still crying.
It is a heartbreaking story, and a lot of parents, they want their kids to be active and play sports, but they got to weigh the risk-benefit analysis.
Absolutely.
All right, well,
story there.
yeah, thank you to Priscilla Thompson for bringing us that report.
Now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Silvana Hanau joins us this morning. Good morning, Silvana.
Good morning. Apple will pay a one-time bonus of as much as $1,000 to store employees next month. Bloomberg reports Apple will give the full amount to retail workers hired before March 31st and $500 to those who joined afterward. New employees brought on for the holiday shopping season will get $200, and bonuses will also be handed out to AppleCare and online sales staff. Apple has not commented. Fast food chains are testing whether customers are willing to return reusable packaging as part of an effort to reduce the amount of waste they create. The Wall Street Journal says McDonald's, Burger King, has committed to a pilot program with a company called TerraCycle, which collects, cleans, and redistributes reusable packaging. Burger King plans to test serving burgers in reusable sandwich boxes and drinks in reusable cups this year. It will charge a refundable deposit, which customers can collect by scanning the container in TerraCycle's app and returning it to Burger King or other collection points. And Uber Eats wants to make it even easier to search for and order food. It's introduced a searchable pickup map that lets you find restaurants by typing not only text, but emojis. A hamburger or sushi roll, for example, could be all you need to find a local eatery. The new feature could be helpful if you're visiting another country and don't know the word for a type of food. The map displays restaurants relative to your location with symbols making it clear the food you'll get.
I love that, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Just like cheeseburger me.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool. Search by emoji. All right, Savannah, thank you so much.
And now, set a reminder, we have a special report for Hispanic Heritage Month tonight right here on NBC News Now. Morgan Radford will anchor Generation Latinx, a conversation with Hispanic and Latino thinkers and movers about the diversity within their growing community. You can catch it here on NBC News Now online and any of your favorite streaming platforms tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. Coming up, he was one of the first public figures to sound the alarm about climate change. And now 15 years after an inconvenient truth, Al Gore is more dedicated to the cause than ever.
This is unfolding faster than the scientists warned us, and now they're telling us we've got to prepare for much worse unless we take action quickly.
Up next, our Lester Holt shares his exclusive interview with the former vice president. More on his message to Americans next on Morning News Now. More residents are being evacuated on the Canary Islands of Spain because of a massive volcano that's been spewing lava and ash since Sunday. This morning, there are new fears about possible toxic gases as the lava makes its way to the sea. NBC News correspondent Miguel Almaguer has more.
As spectacular as it is dangerous, the ongoing volcanic eruptions on the small Spanish island of La Palma are triggering an unstoppable slow-motion disaster. For 4 days, fountains of fire have violently spewed hundreds of feet high, rivers of bright red lava pouring into pools and engulfing homes, 20-foot-high waves of molten rock consuming and covering neighborhoods in their path.
We feared of our life. We were running and into the house, just packing the documents.
Preceded by a 4.2 earthquake, the Cumbre Vieja eruption continues to crack open fissures and volcanic vents as tremors rattle the Canary Islands. The sky filled with massive plumes of smoke and sulfur, forcing 6,000 to evacuate, and now the scramble to save animals as some 200 homes are destroyed.
Pues nada, ahora mismo impotencia porque no se puede hacer nada. Ante un volcán no se puede hacer nada.
The 1,800-degree lava now flowing downhill towards the populated coastline. And perhaps with the most significant threat still ahead, this incredible display of nature's fury could be weeks, even months away from its fiery end. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
Now, it was back in 2006 that former Vice President Al Gore alerted so many people to the devastating consequences of climate change. In his Oscar-winning movie, you probably remember, An Inconvenient Truth.
Hard to believe it's been 15 years. As part of our series on the climate challenge, NBC's Lester Holt sat down with the former vice president to hear his new warnings for the planet.
Hi, Savannah and Vicky. We're hearing from the man who helped sound the alarm about our climate crisis with an inconvenient truth. Former Vice President Al Gore joining me for an exclusive conversation about what was predicted in that film 15 years ago and what is reality today as part of our series, Climate Challenge. They are just some of the defining moments of a changing planet. The unrelenting fires, 19 named storms striking the U.S. since last year, the record and deadly floods in the wake of Hurricane Ida just weeks ago. Like something straight out of a movie, because it was.
And that is what is at stake. Our ability to live on planet Earth.
Are you ever tempted to say, I told you so?
Oh, gosh, I wish that I had been wrong. I wish the scientists whose work I was simply conveying had been wrong, but they weren't wrong.
The 2006 Oscar-winning film An Inconvenient Truth, featuring former Vice President Al Gore, painted a disturbing portrait of the future. Superstorms, melting ice caps, rising temperatures. Is this crisis unfolding more quickly than you would have anticipated?
This is unfolding faster than the scientists warned us, and now they're telling us we've got to prepare for much worse unless we take action quickly.
On this broadcast only yesterday, we looked at the situation in Guatemala, drought. It's forcing farmers who can no longer raise their crops to consider migrating to the United States. How is the geopolitical map being changed by climate change?
One expert commission predicted that if we don't change course, there would be up to 1 billion climate refugees in the balance of this century. And that's politically destabilizing.
China says it'll stop financing the construction of coal-fired plants. Is that a significant step? How do you view that?
I think it's very significant, Lester, because China has been financing 70% of all the coal plants being built outside of China. So for them to cut off that financing finally is a very good step.
Gore believes minds have been changed.
I think Mother Nature's been the most persuasive advocate. 1 out of every 3 Americans has personally experienced, just in this year, one of these climate-related extreme weather disasters. And everybody gets the point that they're becoming more frequent and they're becoming more severe.
Al Gore with 2 warnings 15 years apart.
Very
prescient.
prescient.
Hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lester.
And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.